2, 1.5, 0.25. And we're live. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Kathryn Hecht. I'm the Executive Director of the Alexander Valley Film Society. You should be able to see us live on Facebook right now. There are a dozen of you with us directly in the webinar. Dialing in today from my house in Cloverdale. Special guest coming up in just a moment, dialing all the way from Geyserville, California. And before we get started, I'm now going to do some little housekeeping. If you have any questions, you can email me at kathryn.hecht@avfilmsociety.org. You can pop your questions there into the Facebook live feed. Tess McAfee is on the other side of that, and she'll be monitoring your questions there, questions and comments. As far as I'm concerned, nothing is off limits. I have some sense of what our guest may or may not want to talk about, which is pretty much anything. So we won't do too much censoring there. If you want to chat with us here on the webinar, go ahead. I have the chat room open and I will keep an eye over there. And so without further ado, we're going to meet our guest. Here is Scott in his own words.
Have we all just lost our goddamn minds? Seriously, I mean, how is this a thing? My name is Scott Keneally. I am, among other things, an investigative journalist. And my quest for answers has become an obsession. One that began back in the fall of 2011. That's me, 100 feet from the finish line of my very first Tough Mudder. If I look terrified, that's because I was terrified. I was about to run through a field of electrical wires, each promising to pack a 10,000 volt punch, which was rather alarming for a guy like me, as I'm a bit of a wimp. Though I come from a family of hard-hitting football players, I lacked any of their toughness. I was the kid faking shin splints to skip wind sprints. So what was I doing at probably the toughest event on the planet? I was there for a story, or so I told myself. You see, I have a habit of confessing to things that most reasonable people would keep to themselves. Things like chronic bedwetting, crying, crash dieting on the master cleanse, and sweaty pits. And I figured the story about a beta male peeling himself off the couch, training up, and tackling a paramilitary assault course would make for fairly funny material. I was right. That essay was featured in my local alt weekly. But much more importantly, while researching the history of OCR for the article, I stumbled upon the unsung hero of the industry. And he led me down a rabbit hole that would change my life forever.
Awesome. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to bring online with me today, RISE of the Sufferfests writer, director, subject, Scott Keneally. And he is here. Scott,
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So good to have you. So good to see your face.
Yeah, right? I haven't seen many faces.
Yeah, exactly. We had an opportunity to connect just about an hour ago, just leading up to today's event. And you seemed like you were a little tender, pulling up to get a Wi-Fi signal. So let's just start checking in. How are you? How are you doing? How's your family doing?
More up and down than usual, I'd say. I mean, I'm doing pretty well. I can see a lot of silver linings and opportunities in this, but it's still like you're having to reimagine who you are as a person in a lot of ways, and discovering a lot about yourself. And I'd say it's a challenge. Like a lot of things that have brought me extreme amounts of happiness are on hold. So yeah, it's sort of finding your footing in a whole new surreal world.
Do you feel like how has your experience as a writer and now a storyteller and a visual storyteller, has that affected the way you've been able to articulate your experience of the last some odd 14 days, couple of weeks?
Well, I'd say when I say like opportunity, I feel like I've had a lot of like just really embarrassing parts of my life, or things like cringeworthy things that I end up turning into personal essays for magazines and whatnot. So as a storyteller, I certainly am able to sort of take a distance and realize no matter how bad something is or difficult or challenging, there's going to be something I can spin this into some sort of magic. And like Bedwetting is a great example. That was my like scarlet letter, that like the deepest, darkest secret for me for my whole life until my 20s, when I finally wrote a magazine story for this magazine called Jane Magazine, which and once I was able to air out that, like, it was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. So it was like this thing I never wanted anyone to ever know about. Then I'm like, well, fuck it. I'm just gonna write about it and like process it and use that as my sort of therapy. And I've done that with things like Sweaty Armpits as well. I wrote a story for the New York Times about that, as you saw in that little bit. But I think I'll figure out what the meaning of all this is. But right now I'm just still in the middle and the thick of it.
Totally. So speaking of making meaning of things, so you, one thing, congratulations, by the way, of having a feature-length movie in the can, out in the public, being watched. It's no, as you know, it's no small feat. And I really appreciated how in the film, we get a real glimpse of your personal struggle to not only get the story told, but to continue to it personally evolving as the story is being told. And you give us a nice window into how it came about, but can you go back and take us to the germ of the story and how you heard about this, you started to get familiar with the world, and then what is it about your personal experience or way of processing things that demands you put yourself into the middle of it to understand and really push the story forward authentically? Does that make sense? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So, well, oddly enough, like the film changed a lot because I had difficulty funding it. So initially the germ of the idea was, let me just make a documentary simply exploring the reasons why this is happening. It was not meant to be a personal journey at all. I thought it would be, let's just take the Talking Heads, for instance, and the other characters within the world of Mud. That was sort of how I had imagined the film. We're just investigating this phenomenon. And then it took so much time. Like, it wasn't literally until, what was it, 3 years after I started shooting, and my editor looked at all the footage and was like, you need to be in the film. And I was very, very honestly reluctant to be in the film. But some major things that happened over those 3 years. It was the struggle of making the movie. It was the failed Kickstarter. There was finding out that I was going to become a dad, and quitting a Spartan race, like a 3-mile race, which I literally quit in shame and like deep, dark shame. And those three things all sort of happened within a month of each other. And my editor and thankfully my partner, Hugh Arian, who had a production company, basically the whole team was like, you have to do this. And my reluctance was I didn't want it to feel like a vanity project, or like this is but then I sort of came around to realizing that there was a lot of growth and me personally throughout the course of this process. And it does make it more relatable. And, my hero is like Morgan Spurlock. I mean, and all my writing I'm at the center of it. So it would make sense that I do this, but I think I was just resistant in that I didn't want people to call me out for being a narcissist, which I called out myself in the film. So, Hey, I beat you to it.
Yeah. Well, so then that's actually a really interesting nuance that I'm happy to hear you talk about. So then please do tell us, like, how did the OCR, am I saying that right? OCR?
Yeah.
How did the OCR events first come to your attention?
I was sitting in my friend Scott Loveland's house, and we were, he showed me like literally the promo video, like one of the Tough Mudder promo videos. And I was like, holy shit, that looks terrifying. And then I was like, oh, well, you're a writer. Like, that sounds like a good thing to like just do and write about. Like the wimpy white guy just peeling himself off the couch. And so I did that. And then that guy, Mr. Mouse, you saw at the end of that little clip,
yeah,
like Joe Exotic in this Tiger King documentary, like they're cut from the same cloth, Mr. Mouse. So I had stumbled into this wild character who also the Mr. Mouse Farm for Unfortunates, there are all sorts of people who are just living there who have no other option, and they're like, you know, like it's so much like this Tiger King thing that I knew I'd stumbled upon something really interesting. So when I first discovered him, I was writing a story for the Bohemian, or I didn't know it was the Bohemian yet. It was just a personal essay about doing a Tough Mudder, and I found while researching Tough Mudder, I like just saw some stuff about this battle happening between Mr. Mouse and the guy from Tough Mudder, and I just really did go down a rabbit hole and spent about 9 months researching and reporting this sort of business scandal between the two companies. And I knew Mr. Mouse was an extraordinary character, so I sort of just unknowingly got more sucked into this, because now I was writing a cover story for Outside Magazine. Like, I had an assignment, and so I had a reason to be involved in this world and going deeper down the rabbit hole with Mr. Mouse, and then I'm meeting people within the community, and also I was profoundly affected by my first Tough Mudder. There was something really amazing about, you're standing 25 feet from a free beer. You got to pay for the beer. You pay 100. You pay 100. Like, they call it a free beer. They geniusly marketed it as a free beer, but like, you pay $200 for a ticket. So
yeah.
Is it free? But those electrical wires and that feeling of accomplishment when you get through that, it was insane, because you're seeing people collapse in front of you, like screaming bloody murder and face planting in the mud, and you're like, is that going to be me? And when you go through something like that, it's just such a energizing, rewarding experience. So, and then also seeing how people come together and help each other over walls, and there's just so many beautiful aspects to that community that I knew this wasn't going to be one of my like one-off type stories. Like, there's something about this world that had some real magic, and I felt like it was a sharp reaction. I knew like it took a while to like process, and I had other friends that I talked to about the phenomenon, and they sort of helped guide my understanding of what was happening, and had me thinking deeper about it. Shout out to Dan Hill and Mark Morford. But there were a lot of conversations I had that sort of made me look a little deeper into what was happening beneath the surface, because it did feel initially like a reaction, like just so radical, and then as you are able to explore a little deeper, and the process of discovery for me was really the highlight of it. It was having a sense that there's a masculinity crisis, or maybe I'd heard about that, and then watching TED Talks and finding out who like the foremost experts in these different sort of themes, whether it's our relationship with technology, Nick and Nicholas Carr, and then finding out who I wanted to talk to, and listen, podcasts, all of it was just like a research, and I loved it. I was just diving in, and then like reaching out to them and trying to and the second someone said yes, it was such a thrill. Like, making a film, it was such a disheartening, and a lot of times, especially when I didn't know how I was going to fund it, like process, it was discouraging and just like dispiriting, and you're like, but then like Tim Ferriss calls you out of the blue because you left a voicemail on his book publisher's message after trying for 6 months to get a hold of him, and you couldn't. Then finally you had an idea, I'm going to call his book publisher and leave a voice message, and then Tim Ferriss called me like 45 minutes later, and I remember like hitting mute and screaming, like I was just like I was in the driveway like, yes, and then like you're so like, all right, now I got Tim Ferriss, now maybe I can use Tim Ferriss to get this guy, because it adds legitimacy. It was just like this real organic process. I'd never made a movie, obviously, and so the process of it was just this extreme roller coaster. Fortunately, I'm like blindly optimistic, so like I always knew I was gonna gut this one out and make it happen.
So that there's so much in what you've shared already, and in the movie. I mean, it really is, Scott. I don't want to blow smoke up your ass. I think it's a really interesting marriage in the film of personal discovery and reporting, and so I want to go back. I'm trying to get to the genesis of where did the reporting come from? So you were writing exposés and articles before this. Did you train? Did you go to college for journalism? What is that part of the story arc for you?
I studied English at Boston College, and then I went to USF for creative writing. I got a master's in creative writing.
And are you from California?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay. Okay.
And so I had never written my expose about Tough Mudder was the first expose I had written. I'd mostly written humor essays about, peeing. So it's that
An
wasn't
expose of your own urine.
yeah. So, but when I realized there was a business story and a scandal, I knew very quickly I wanted to just put my Fletch hat on and become an investigative journalist. And I remember telling my wife, like, because it took an enormous amount of time. Like, I made a good amount of money from that story, but like when you think about the hours I put in, it was like I was making license plates in prison because I spent so much time reading, just like brushing up on legalese and just reading hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents, and trying to make sense of it all. So, but it was just like feeling this. It felt like an urge, like I have to tell this story. No one has told this story yet. The scandal had already happened, and it was just this. I knew there was merit in it, especially since Mr. Mouse is such an extraordinary character.
And when's the last time you were in touch with him?
I have a very complicated, very, very complicated relationship with him. He actually wrote me about 3 weeks ago. He's still hell bent on taking down Tough Mudder and Will Dean. Like he hasn't. So he has some new information, and he sent me a whole bunch more documents, like 80 more pages of PDFs, that he wants me to take them down. And I mean, he's singularly focused on the demise of Tough Mudder. So, and I love the guy. Like the thing I'm most proud of, aside from the documentary, in my entire career, I wrote a piece for Rolling Stone, a couple, like when the CEO of Tough Mudder wrote a memoir called "It Takes a Tribe." A friend had sent me a galley of that before it came out, so I timed a piece for Rolling Stone, which was basically a takedown of his memoir and the entire premise behind it, because he just washed over the influence of Mr. Mouse and just like lied like through his teeth. And I was there, and it was like it was the thing. I just felt like this is the thing. When Mr. Mouse eventually passes, I'll send this to the New York Times and hope they pick it up for an obituary, because has such an importance in this modern fitness world. Like no one knows about him really unless they saw my film or had read stories I've written about him. So I feel like I liked what he represented in this world, and wanted to like champion that.
It shows. I think that's a real testament to whatever, vision and articulation is growing for you as a storyteller. It shows that you cared about him in the film, and that is a really lovely lens to come through. So, I'm going to pause for just a second, because we've already got some questions coming in. We have a personal question, actually, from Paul Jackman, who's down in the East Bay. You know Paul?
Yeah. Hell
okay,
yeah.
So Paul is Funflix. He runs Funflix, and he's our partner in every outdoor screening that we do up here. He writes, personal question. Hey, Scott, you live in an area that was ravaged by fires. Sonoma County has had to bounce back a few times. How are you finding COVID-19 different as a community? How is the OCR community dealing with it, assuming all the events are canceled? And hi again from Paul.
Hey, Paul. So Paul provided the screen for several of my screenings, including the hometown premiere at Roth Winery. Thanks, Paul. All right. So the real trick and mind F, censored it there. I don't know if
you don't have to censor.
All right. The mind fuck about this whole thing is the beauty of the aftermath of the fires is community coming together and just people helping people. And that was the thing that sort of made sense of it all. And you're like, this is great. And now we can't do that. So it's so weird. We want to rally together, but we can't. Like it's really, really challenging. So I'm trying to think about his question was how the OCR community is handling it. To be honest, like I have not really been keeping up on that side of things. That I have spent so much time like in Facebook groups and really obsessed with that world. I've sort of taken a pause. So I know they've been canceling everything, and I still run the races. We were heading down to San Luis Obispo the middle of March for an event that got canceled, a Spartan race. So I still love it and still do it, but I haven't my attention has been elsewhere. So.
Well, there's also been an in-between phase too, Scott, right? Because you didn't do a traditional, I say traditional, you didn't do a traditional festival run with the film. And you were very specific about where you wanted it to screen and who you wanted to screen it for and with. And it was really tied to the experience of that community. Am I right?
Yeah, so it was really a timing thing. Like the movie was ready to be released in May. And so and the festivals I would want to be a part of were many, many months away. So the idea of holding onto this film that I've spent 4 years making so that I can maybe possibly get into South by Southwest and premiere there, or Sundance, or Toronto, or New York. I mean, or Tribeca, I didn't want to sit on it. So I was like, how do I leverage the passion of this community and just create my own film festival? Why don't I take this thing on the road? And Funflix helped with that, and CrossFit boxes and around the country, and so I rented out small theaters, and people opened spaces for me to do this, and I just sort of do it in Tahoe or wherever races were, and right. I wanted to bring the film directly to the community, and that was fun, and I don't regret. It's funny, there's so much legitimacy. People are like, oh, where did it screen? And fortunately, I can be Delta and United and British Air and Virgin Atlantic, because the airlines picked it up. There were 10 airlines that had it, and that was, for me, for an independent filmmaker, it's hard. The validation you get is from it premiered at this thing and it maybe got this award, or even if it didn't, at least it did the festival circuit. And I went a different route. And had the airlines not picked it up, I think I'd feel a little I might question, even though I had a fun time on it, I might just sort of question, I don't have this sort of thing that validates it other than I made a movie. But it was really cool. It spent most of 2017 on airlines, and I got so just people came out of the woodworks from my life who were taking pictures of the seat back, and they're like, you are great. And those bastards should have paid for it earlier. But they most people saw it for free on the airlines, which was great, because at this point I just want this thing to be seen. It's just a thing.
And how did that deal with the airlines work? Do they pay you per booking, or?
They pay you a licensing fee for whatever 6 or 8 month period or a year, and it's just a simple fee. You can't really, they don't track it for you. Yeah. It's just a one-off, but it certainly helped.
And how did that came through a relationship, right?
I screened the film at World's Toughest Mudder, and for about 400, I screened a teaser. It was a 7-minute just sort of sizzle for about 300 or 400 people from World's Toughest Mudder, in a conference room at, I don't know, somewhere outside of Vegas, or in Vegas. And then someone came up to me afterwards, or saw me on the course, and afterwards was like, hey, I work for Terry Steiner. It's a film distribution company that does the airlines. When the movie's done, give me a call. And so I did, and he liked it enough to take it on and try selling it. And I guess the buyers liked it enough to put it on their airline. So it really worked out well. There was 2 or 3 months where Delta, it was on in the featured section, between Moonlight and Rogue One, Star Wars,
naturally.
Yeah, I mean, but it was pretty cool. And I took as many flights as I could, and took as many selfies of myself on the plane as possible.
We have another question here from Erin Sheridan. She says, hi, Scott. I'm sorry, I assumed that was a she. Erin writes, hi, Scott. Thanks for doing this. My question, the story of OCR has continued beyond where the storyline of your movie has ended. Lots of the mom and pop mud runs have gone away, Tough Mudder being partially bought by Spartan. Race cost inflation. Has OCR gone where you thought it would go? And where do you think the sport of OCR will be in 5 years?
I think, and very much hope, that Spartan and Tough Mudder are still around and that people are still doing this. I didn't think it would. I mean, what do I think? The industry is, I think, maybe stable. Who knows what's going to happen with COVID, to be honest. But From what I understand, Spartan is still growing. Tough Mudder went bankrupt, and I don't know if that's a matter of demand as much as organizational, particularly at the top, like you, Wildine. So I think like there were some issues that caused them to go under that had nothing to do with participant demand. So that said, these experiences, like I want to do a Tough Mudder with my son Raleigh in however many years I got to wait. I want to do these things, and so I really genuinely hope the mom and pops and all of it just sort of stays around. I think more, right now I would not kill, but for a Peloton. I've really gotten into spin as my wife has. She's a spin instructor for the Daily Method in Healdsburg, and before COVID, I was doing it like 4 days a week and loving it. And what I love about it is also just being in the room with the people. Like Peloton is cool, but I think the one thing we're going to realize after we're all allowed to be together is the pent up part is going to be the social connection and being together. Like CrossFit is not going away, group fitness is not going away, Spartan race is not going away. Like we want these shared experiences. That concerts are not going away. Like I do hope there are a lot of things that go away. I hope our world is radically different at the end of this. Like if we can't use this to sort of maybe save the environment and just figure out the way we're living on Earth and take this time to pause, like then this has been a pointless exercise and it's all a net loss. I'm hoping people are looking back on this moment in time many hundreds of years from now and thinking this is a real turning point for humanity. So that said, I really hope OCR thrives into the future, and I have been working for years on my own concept for an event. So perhaps someday, Aaron, you can run Other Side Sonoma.
Do you want to talk about that at all, or we'll talk about that in another Q&A?
Yeah, we could do that another time.
Okay.
It's just like this dream that I've been really working on, and just I feel like have hit the turning point and it's moving forward. This happened, but it'll happen. So
good. Yeah, we like dreams.
Yeah.
So I want to change gears just a minute, because one of the things that I thought was really fantastic about the film was your commitment to looking at performed identity and masculinity. You didn't get so much into toxic masculinity per se, but the performed identity piece and gender roles and all of that. And again, I feel like personally, I felt it was made even more powerful by your personal commitment of exploring what those things meant to you. And so I'm curious now that the film is in the can, the film has been viewed by friends, family, strangers. Where does all this sit with you right now? And I now know your family has grown and you are a father times two. What is this masculinity piece, being a man? How has that evolved?
Well, the protector role feels like it. I mean, I feel the years I've done this. Well, here, I mentioned this earlier to you, and maybe this would be a good time to talk about this. The experience of Kincaid Fires was really deeply unsettling for me. I think in the years since the film, maybe I'd slipped back into being more of a bit of a just enougher and working out but not working out real like hard enough, and I maybe got a little lazy. And then the Kincaid Fires happened, and that was a bit of a shock to the system. I was being evacuated with my family 3 times. We were the first people to get the call to leave. I remember like I was up all night packing stuff up, getting ready because I'm watching the fire come towards us, and then just that feeling of helplessness for 10 days where your life is just totally thrown off, and I'm just glued to an iPhone and feeling super helpless and useless. And it was disempowering in a way that I didn't expect, and it just made me feel so bad that I eventually had the realization I should probably man up a bit, become a volunteer firefighter here in Geyserville. And so I think things like what's happening in the world and being a father now of 2 and wanting to be my very best self, like those are make me want to like assume the protector role even more so, and be a provider of safety for my family and my community. So I think more than anything, it's just been real life that has made me want to step into masculinity a bit more. Not
And
toxic masculinity, but
right. Thank you. We don't want that. Can you then, I think now is a really good time to maybe talk about how this has inspired a potential upcoming project.
So I have been kicking, yeah, sure. I've been kicking around. Nothing has called me since making Rise of Sufferfests. Like I had an idea afterwards to maybe have a television show called Man Up, in which every like episode is about, it would explore a lost art of masculinity, like whether it's wayfaring, navigating by stick and stars, or how to fight. We're not really allowed to fight anymore. You get arrested for those such things, but like I just saw Hamilton, and shit went down back in the day, like there was dueling. So we've sort of taken away all sorts of outlets for masculine drive, and I like the idea of a television show of like man camp or something, where a new dad learns how to do man stuff before his son realizes daddy doesn't know shit. And so each episode, like how to throw a punch without breaking my wrist. Like haven't thrown many punches in my life. Like I've had my nose broken from punches, but haven't really gotten much back. So the idea of like, let's say a Ronda Rousey trained me, and the start of the story is me, a funny bit about how I have never been in a fight. In the one fight, I had my nose broken before I even like lifted a finger. And then like throughout that, I'm getting trained on how to throw punches, and I'm, and then while all throughout that, I have talking heads talking about, the history of masculinity, and let's say dueling and fighting, and at what point that has been taken away by police officers. We've outsourced, so many things to law enforcement, and then now at the judicial system, like what it sort of does to the male psyche, to be in a world where you can't sort of like be rough and tumble. And after putting so much effort into the documentary, so I had anonymous content, was like I had a producer there that was helping me shop this around, this idea for a television series. And I realized there's no easy way to make this. No one like jumped at it, and I was not going to push another boulder up the hill. So I decided not to pursue another film project like that. But then when the Kincaid fires happened, it was the first time I felt like called to tell a story, like where, like I'd be inspired by the process of becoming a volunteer firefighter, of learning of just learning some new skills, and being simultaneously a role model to my son Raleigh, and also like a service member to the community. I mean, I love living here. I don't want to like leave Sonoma County, but if I'm going to live here, I got to figure out a way to not feel the way like disempowered and scared and hopeless and helpless. So, there's a photo.
Yeah, I've got a picture up now with you and one of our local heroes. You want to talk about this guy for a sec?
Yeah, that's Marshall Tuberville. He's our fire chief. He also works for Cal Fire, and he has been coming up. So he'd obviously be a resource for the documentary and next doc, and also he's just a wonderful human. So he's been coming up to the Voight Ranch here and pointing out trees we need to take down to do some, management and defensible space, and just sort of clean things up so that we can be in the best possible situation if the fire does come roaring through here. And so that was a couple days ago on Friday. He came up and brought a fire truck, and we had about 6 burn piles. And I've been like cutting a lot of things, like mowing down trees here to, trees that definitely should go to keep the space safer over the past few weeks. And we had a burn day. Unfortunately, I also like mowed my knee open with the chainsaw. So last Saturday I went to the ER as you do on a Saturday. And if you follow me on Instagram at Scott Keneally, I do have a story highlight where I'll take you through last Saturday. As I cut my leg open and ended up in the ER. Oddly enough, or funny enough, I wasn't I was the third person at Kaiser that day with a chainsaw accident.
Oh my God.
Right, because now everyone's home and they're like, oh, I'll cut that. Like, I don't know how to use a chainsaw, obviously. I just rip my knee open. So yeah, and there you go. So you're like, oh, this sucks. That I would hate that to happen to me. But my brain, the storyteller, I'm like, well, that's gonna be funny in this documentary. Like the story has to start with somewhere. Like, I'm Scott, I don't know how to use a chainsaw and I ripped my leg open. But in a year, I hope to be cutting down trees and helping save the community.
Yeah.
Because I'm a part, like I could see this is like the low end of the story arc, and hopefully it gets better from here.
So I'm gonna show one more picture here. So this is the expanded family here. Who do we have in this picture, Scott?
We have my humans. We have my lovely wife, Amber, and we have the wide-mouthed Birdie, my daughter, and that's Raleigh, my boy, who was born in the documentary. Like, you see him like 2 seconds after he was birthed.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Even more amazing than my technical skills with Zoom. But thinking about that picture and about the humans in that photo, and so you've had this time now where you've got maybe 1 to some 7, 8, 9 stories gestating somewhere in there, and then like Paul referred to, we've got crisis after crisis happening in Sonoma County, and then this this expanding beautiful family, and your own personal process right in the middle of it. And how do you think that the family unit itself is going to inform your storytelling in the future?
If the past is any indication, entirely. I mean, Amber was obviously such a big part of that documentary process, the last one, and would certainly be for this. I mean, family is obviously the most important thing, the thing you spend the most time thinking about, and the people you spend the most time with. And since I'm a storyteller who largely focuses on his own experience, I think like it's all, why do I want to become a firefighter? Part of it's just because it's the Raleigh, it's the wanting to protect the family, it's wanting to show my kids that it's like you can be a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I want to be part of something that's bigger than myself. I also personally want to go through that, so it's not just to show him, it's also to learn that myself.
Yeah. So we have one last question before we wrap up with last thoughts. Dan Hill has written in and said, I'd love to produce a documentary. How did you get the initial funding to launch it? And I take it he's probably giving you a little screw there, but this was such a good part of the film for you to talk about this. And the humility with which you approached it is right on and so necessary. But tell us a little bit about that. You learned a ton.
Hold on. All right, so Dan's question, how did I get the initial funding? That was Dan. All right. All right, ask again. I'm sorry. I just had a.
He says.
Yeah, no, I know his question. What's yours? Is there? Do you want me to answer his?
Yeah. So getting the initial funding, and that question begets a kind of more of a framing question of talking about that process. And even though you explored it pretty personally and transparently in the film,
right.
Just more about that.
So Dan not only was the first person to give me I met this guy, so Dan Hill, who asked the question, a little context. He was a co-founder of Ragnar Relay, which is a popular road race or relay race. I don't know. I haven't done it. Sorry, Dan. He also started the Electric Run, which is a huge phenomenon, like with 1 million people in a year doing this night Neon Run, and more recently he turned his attention to like a more meaningful spiritual experience called Rise. It's a lantern festival in the Mojave Desert. So Dan's a sort of a pioneer in the active adventure space, and we were on a panel together in San Antonio, and he had, I guess, read my piece in about Tough Mudder and that Outside magazine story, and we just got to talking and we hit it off. And he was one of the first people to start probing the deeper questions. Dan's like a higher thinker, and he was maybe the first person to get me sort of thinking on these levels of like why we're doing it. He also loved Mr. Mouse, and so he offered to give me a little bit of seed money, and then he also convinced a couple other of his friends to do so. So I had this like initial $30,000 nest egg to start shooting, and immediately I went to England to start shooting Mr. Mouse because I thought he might not last. You know, he's a little older, so I wanted to make sure that I got it going and got him as many interviews with him on film and much footage, and then I was able to carry that initial seed money for a while, all in the anticipation that the Kickstarter would be a huge success.
Right.
And I remember the night before right before I launched, Dan was like, "How much are you asking for on Kickstarter?" And I was like, $297,000. I had like factored in taxes, the marketing budget, like all of it. I was like, I don't want to ask twice for funding. Like, I want to get this thing funded. And obviously that was a grave or miscalculation. I mean, I got my ass handed to me. It was the worst 40 days of my whole life was this Kickstarter campaign. It was like, I knew within like an hour that we were fucked. And it was just like, I had all those other hours from the start of the campaign to the end that I was just like in this like full body cringe and then trying to figure out how to make it happen. So that was basically I was sure that'd be a success. So the night before I called Dan and he's like, "How much are you asking?" 297. He's like, "Whoa, don't you think you should ask like 100 and just like, you know, overachieve?" And I was like, and I said like, "Go big or go home." And I went home. It was I raised like 9% of like what I was asking for. And of course, like I had no experience making a movie and you're asking for $300,000, really, dude? So I wouldn't change a thing though, because the failure of the Kickstarter is why the movie is what it is. Like if that was a success, it would have been like a 1-year process making this movie, and it, you know, like it just would have been a whole different story. And I'm proud of the way the story turned out.
Agreed. I think it really kind of opened a chasm of self-reflection that we just wouldn't have had a window into had it gone a different way. So we're coming up at 2:45, and just want to be mindful of time and start to wrap up. So Scott, what's next? So we have an immediate life that we have to deal with here, which is compromised in a couple of different ways. What are you going to do tomorrow? What is life like for you right now?
I would love that answer. And it's something I'm gonna work on today, is figuring out what I'm gonna do tomorrow, because I feel like the structure is always usually helpful. I mean, as a freelance writer, in general, my life is in flux, and I'm on call for certain directors that I work with, and it's fluid. But I think especially now that I don't have a lot of freelance work coming in, I need to figure out what tomorrow looks like. Lately, I've been doing dude stuff here on the ranch, at the White Ranch. I'm cutting down trees in my knee. But I think, like one thing I want to do is, a next step for me is to create like a trailer for this forthcoming documentary about whatever it is about. And then I had talked to a friend in the film world who could make some introductions to like, and I'd ideally sell this ahead of time. So make like a 2.5-minute trailer. This is what the movie, or a 4-minute trailer. Sizzle. This is what it is. This is who I am. I made this movie. One thing, like Morgan Spurlock, after the film came out, my wife and I had lunch with him in New York, and like one of the things that I remember from that lunch was, now that you've made a movie, like you can get other people to pay you to make your next one. Like you don't have to go through that again. So I'm hoping, I know like I could put together a good sizzle, and ideally I find a distributor ahead of time that will help fund the production, so I don't have to struggle the way I did over the last many years.
Unless you wanted to make a film about it while you were doing it again.
Yeah, I could do without that part.
Well, Scott, I can't thank you enough personally for just taking the time. I know it's kind of a crazy time, but it's just been a perfect moment for us to kind of plug in and connect with one another and just talk about telling stories and passions and identity and being transparent and how we matter in our communities. And I, Amber may not know this, but I follow her on Instagram and her burpee magic and admire it.
40,000 burpees last year for her
Yeah.
40th birthday.
She's a
Crazy.
beast. She's a beast. But it's so amazing to have you with us. And we actually, as far as Film Society news, we have a couple of things coming up this week. We have a distance learning opportunity that we're launching tomorrow for middle schoolers. And we still have some spots open for that. All of the information is on our website under our Shelter in Place series. On Wednesday night, we're going to be doing our very first Netflix watch party with Uncorked, which is a new film on Netflix. And we're partnering with Kinsmoke out of Healdsburg and Reeve Wines. Details also on our website. And then at the same time, next week on Sunday, we'll be back with Jill Hales of Barn Diva, who is also a film critic. And we're going to talk to her about Touch of Evil, Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. So we hope everybody comes back to join us. Thank you once more, Scott, for taking the time to be with us today. We are recording this. This has been on Facebook Live. So as soon as we have the links, we'll post those. And any last thoughts, Scott, as we log off here?
Thank you for doing this. This has been fun.
You're welcome.
And I love Jill, and I'm curious if she's a film critic, what she thought about mine.
Ooh, we'll get
Hi,
her to
Jill.
watch it. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Stay safe. May you and your families be well, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.